Hello, everyone. Welcome. This presentation is called Guide to Having a Smooth Application Process. My name is Diana. My pronouns are she, hers. I am a retention specialist in the Academic Advancement Center. Stephanie Cuevas is not here to present with me, but we're offering this recording for folks who are interested in learning a little bit more about application pieces for students in all majors. So welcome. So I just want to make sure that we start off talking a little bit about what are some timeline pieces to keep in mind for applying for graduate school. What are some things that are not a guideline that you need to stick to, but more of like recommendations. So I just want to start off with a timeline. Regardless of what year you are in undergrad or taking some time off, some of the things to keep in mind when thinking about graduate school is to maintain a high GPA. This doesn't mean you need to have a 4.0. This doesn't mean you need to only get A's and B's. Everyone has different journeys in their undergrad. I think something to keep in mind as you're thinking about GPA and what does that mean for you specifically in your journey currently is what are the minimum GPA requirements for the programs that you're interested in. Typically 3.0 and above is a requirement for most graduate programs, but just keep those things in mind. If you are below a 3.0 GPA, I think it's totally okay to still apply. There sometimes may be opportunities with applications for graduate school where they'll have you talk a little bit about like, what was that experience like for you? They basically want to see that you've grown and have learned from that and what are some tactics and things that you have done now moving forward from that. So just keep those things in mind and just know that you can still apply for graduate school if your GPA is not where it needs to be, and think about what are other pieces that can make up for that, whether it's experience, making sure that you have folks who can write strong letters of recommendation, strong interviews. So just keep those things in mind for GPA. Another thing that I mentioned in regards to like helping GPA pieces if you're not where you need to be is just gaining relevant field and research experience. And this is for all majors. Sometimes we think that research experience and field experience is only applicable for folks in STEM fields, but that's not the case. There are always opportunities to get experience, whether that's getting engaged with a student organization on campus that's focused on your field, whether that's involvement on campus with just offices, volunteering, being involved in the community, and research experience really is working alongside any professor on campus who's doing this work. And if this is something you haven't had the opportunity to do, I would say really talk to your professors about those opportunities, because yes, it does sound intimidating. And I think once you hear about it more, you feel more comfortable understanding what it entails and understanding that it is a great opportunity for you. Along with that, it's just getting to know your faculty members. These are the folks who are in your field who understand different components of your field, maybe can even provide guidance on career paths, graduate school, and also can provide those research and field experiences. And so it'll be really awesome to have those connections along with having folks who can write you a letter of recommendation. Typically, it's good to have at least one faculty member if your program or the prospective program that you're applying for, unless they're asking for specifically a number of faculty letter recommendations. So they might ask for one, or all three have to be from faculty. So just know that it'll be important for you to have faculty who can write you, at least one faculty member who can write you a strong letter of recommendation. So build those connections. It doesn't have to be a faculty member that you've had already. I would say it might take a little bit of time and research on your end to look at who are folks on campus who are doing the work that you might be interested in the future, setting up an informal interview and connecting even after that. So make sure that you're building those relationships. So some things to keep in mind if you are in your second to last year, typically a junior year. At this point, you're going to want to start researching graduate programs and faculty advisors. The faculty advisors in each of these graduate programs, right, are going to be the folks who are going to be providing you that support are going to probably be the folks who are going to be offering you assistantships. And if they don't offer you those assistantships, sometimes they can't offer you acceptance into the program, right? And mainly that's because they want to make sure that you have some form of funding. So if a faculty member has only one spot available for their research, that means that any student who's involved, who's interested in getting support from that faculty member, right, they only have that one spot available. So just know and think about those pieces. Not all programs are like this. This is just an example of what it would mean to look at faculty advisors for graduate programs. I think this is more specific to STEM fields, but keep those things in mind. Send out information / requests to schools. And so you are more than welcome to reach out to these programs. Typically on their website, they'll have a contact for someone, right? A coordinator who helps answer questions for prospective students, who communicates any open house information for folks who can just come and visit the program if they're interested, right? So make sure to do that research, look online. And if they don't provide that information, check in with admissions from that institution. If there are open house, if there is a panel that's available for folks who are interested in the program, take advantage of those pieces. That's going to be a really great way to get the hands-on information that you're going to want to take into consideration when you're making a decision. The next piece is determine application procedures, exam requirements, and deadlines. So it might take some time to figure out, okay, what are the things that I need to remember about each program that I'm thinking about? It might feel overwhelming. There might be too much information to have to track. So this is where we're gonna talk a little bit about like how to organize your materials. And I don't have an example here in this presentation to show for folks who are watching this recording, but just know that the resource folder that is being shared out from the conference can house resources that I'm going to be talking about. So just make sure to take a look at those digital handouts that we're providing. One of those pieces is an Excel sheet that helps students organize all those components. So, right, so does this program require a GRE? When is the deadline for this program? How many letters of recommendation does this program ask for? So it's an Excel sheet that we created. As an example, it doesn't have to be what you use. You can take a look at it, make your own based off like what you think would be most helpful for you. But that Excel sheet on tracking program information is what we're talking about at this point, is making sure you're tracking all the appropriate information for all the graduate programs, making sure you're keeping an eye on it and following through. This will help you so much with organization throughout your application process. So right now, if you are a first year, second year, third year, taking some time off after undergrad, and you're starting to gather information from programs, you want to start just putting together that Excel sheet. It might feel like it might be too early. Maybe you're still not even sure if you want to attend graduate school, but you want to start tracking that information because it does take a lot of time to do that research. You don't want to have to feel like you're starting over every time that you have like the time to look for graduate school information. So make sure you're starting to track that now if you're thinking about graduate school. The next bullet is study for and possibly take entrance exams. And so I think along with the Excel sheet on tracking information, you'll know which programs are asking for which admissions exam, whether that's the GRE, GMAT, LSAT, all those things. Make sure to keep in mind that information. Look at that admission exam information online. They'll have a timeline on like when they offer those pieces, when you can sign up, what the fee is. And then create a timeline, give yourself time to study for those pieces. A tip that I want to talk about in this piece as well for entrance exams is always check to see if they offer a waiver. Typically, they do. It's just a matter of looking for that information on their website, whether you're a TRIO student, so TRIO SSS, so that includes students from the Academic Advancement Center, from our office, other TRIO programs. If you're not sure if you qualify, just always look for that information and always just ask. And then the last piece in consideration for junior year is sign up for additional classes that you may need for your senior year. Typically the programs will state and mention if they are wanting you to have certain classes in your undergrad experience, right? I think I see this mostly with like folks going into the medical field needing specific class requirements. So just making sure that you're meeting those requirements. If your program doesn't have any of those specific requirements, think about what are some classes that you think would be helpful to have in your transcript as you're thinking about graduate school for your field. Okay, so the next piece is thinking about what are things that could be helpful in your senior year. And if you're taking some time off, maybe it's like, what are things that you can be doing during that time off if graduate school is happening for you next year. So at this point, pretty early on in your senior year, you want to be asking for those letters of recommendation from faculty. This doesn't always have to be faculty. Again, this is going to be depending on the program. So, but it's always good to have at least one faculty member in those recommendation letters. That can also include retention specialists from the Academic Advancement Center if you're working with us, mentors, employers. So really think about who are these people for you. I think at this time it's good to just pause this video and make a mental note or pull out a piece of paper and write down 3 folks who come to mind who can speak on your strengths, who can speak on your journey as an undergrad and how you could be a great fit for this graduate program. So take a few minutes and do that. And again, this can be faculty, mentors, employers. I think something that I want to make sure that you think about is, was that activity challenging for you? Was it hard to think about folks? Or was it really easy for you to do? Did names pop up right away? You knew exactly who you could talk to now. You had a faculty member. Whether you had a hard time or not, I think this just really speaks to like where students might be at this point, thinking about their relationships with mentors, advisors, faculty members, all those pieces, because we want to make sure that you're leaving undergrad with those connections, even if graduate school is not something that you're thinking about, or maybe it's not something that you want to do right away. You want to make sure you have these strong connections after you graduate. If you're going into the field, taking some time off, right? That's totally okay. But making sure that you're leaving under your undergrad experience with these connections and continuing to build those connections even after as an alumni. So just keep those things in mind. Later in this presentation, we're also going to talk about what are appropriate ways to ask for recommendation letters, because there's a whole process and things to keep in mind to ask folks to write you a strong recommendation letter. So we'll talk about that here in a couple of slides. So at this point, you're going to be also taking required entrance exams as we talked about. So this is typically around the time that you can do that. You want to be doing that September and October, because typically in November is when you can register again if you need to take it for a better score. So making sure that you're giving yourself time in case you need to do that. The next piece is contact prospective faculty advisors. So if you didn't do that earlier, maybe when you were exploring, I think now at this point would be a good time to contact those faculty advisors if it's applicable for your program, if having a connection to a faculty advisor is going to be how they determine if you're admitted or not. And again, this is mostly seen in STEM fields. If they are looking for folks to help with research and they can only take on a certain amount. And if you are taken on by a faculty advisor, that's basically folks getting an entrance into the program. And so just thinking about those pieces, if that is the case for your program, making sure that you're building those connections and talking to folks now. Also, something that's good to keep in mind when contacting faculty is always just look at the website first to see if they provide any of their information on their website. Do your research, make sure that you know about those faculty advisors before you give them a call, ask for their time, set up an informal interview, because if you're asking the questions that they can just easily reroute you to the website, you are basically leaving the impression that you haven't done that research. And so just make sure you're doing that research on them. And typically on their website, it'll also indicate if they are available for folks to contact them via email, or if they would prefer that students contact the coordinator first and not contact any faculty. So make sure that you read up on that before you do any contact. The next piece is start preparing application materials. So hopefully an Excel sheet has been made already for this this part of the process, right? So now you have a clear outline of what are the things that you need to do for each program, making sure that you're tracking that login information for each school, taking a look at all those pieces regarding deadlines. So making sure that you're putting those pieces together at this point. Another piece is just to look at funding, right? So that it might include assistantships, any other funding resource that you'll need. Keeping that in mind because they might have their own separate application pieces on the website, different deadlines. So make sure that you're keeping an eye on that as well. So now we're hitting the semester around November, December, right? At this point, typically folks are submitting their applications, they're ordering transcripts. The program will tell you if they need an official or unofficial. Typically, it's an official one. So making sure that you order those transcripts because it does take a little bit depending on how you're ordering those transcripts. So make sure that you take a look at how they would like those transcripts. And then at this point, you might also be applying for assistantships or other financial opportunities. So remember that for graduate school, you still should be applying for the FAFSA. So don't lose that login information. FAFSA is still applicable for graduate school, and just any other scholarships or assistantships that are mainly housed within their department. You might still find some state or local pieces for graduate school. So just make sure to keep an eye on those. And then now we're hitting January, February, March, April, spring semester. So at this point, folks are starting to arrange school visits. So at this point, folks have already heard back from schools, whether they've been accepted or not. And this is where now you're navigating like what school is the best fit. If you do have access to visiting a school, please take advantage of that, whether that's virtually or in person. Always ask what they're offering, what format. Now that we have more experience with doing things virtually, in person, hybrid, it's totally okay. And we encourage you to ask about those pieces. If a graduate program is only offering in-person school visits, make sure to ask about funding for travel. Do they cover the cost of your flight? Maybe your taxi ride or Lyft ride from the airport, even housing, honestly. So make sure to ask about those pieces as well. And make sure that you're tracking that information just so you're not losing those pieces and paying out of pocket for things that maybe you forgot about because someone emailed you saying that they do pay for something and you totally forgot. April 15th is typically the deadline across the nation for our graduate programs. So just keep those in mind, but make sure that you know what the deadline is for your graduate program. They might have something sooner. So just make sure that you're keeping an eye on that. And typically at this point is when you're submitting those decisions for schools, whether you're attending or not. All right, so just moving right along. This is going to go back to that Excel sheet. Here are some things that would be helpful. We're not saying that these are the only things that are helpful, but some things to keep in mind as you're creating that Excel sheet. Again, I won't be pulling up that Excel sheet here, but just know to look for an Excel sheet in the resource pieces that we sent out regarding conference materials. Some of the things that you can track in that Excel sheet could be like, okay, what's the university name? What's the focus of the program? That makes a difference too, right? So really understanding your field because the program focus will be a big part in that. The deadlines, if there are any waivers, what are those fees? Who's the contact person for that program? What's the total cost, right? I think that's a big one to include. So make sure that you include that as a column and program requirements. So thinking about what is important for you, really you're putting together this Excel sheet based on like, what are the major pieces that are going to be important for you in your decision making. So at this point, we ask students, okay, what are at least 3 things that you know you want to track? So take some time right now, again, pull out a piece of paper, that same paper that maybe you already had from the earlier activity, write down what are the 3 things that are going to be important in your decision making that you want to make sure that you track. Cool. So just make sure you write that down and keep that in mind for your Excel sheet. So just making sure that you're also thinking about what are ways to not have your Excel sheet get really messy, right? This is just an example and a recommendation. It's not something that you need to do, but some of the things that you can add into your Excel sheet is different sheets at the bottom so that your Excel sheet doesn't get really overwhelming. Again, one of those things can be just the interesting program. So this includes like all the programs that you're researching. This might be 3, this could be 6, maybe even 10. So just those are the programs that you're interested in. Your next sheet in that same Excel document could be like, okay, which are the ones that you're actually like really interested in? The first ones were just all the ones that you looked into, you weren't even sure if you would attend, but what are the ones that are really standing out to you? Just so that you're condensing that information, right? Okay, so the last piece could also now be a third sheet in that Excel document. And this could be the final schools. This could be like the schools that you actually applied for. So you don't want to have your Excel sheet include 15 programs that you looked into, but you only ended up applying for 3, right? You don't want to be going referring to that document all the time because you need that information moving forward with a ton of things that you don't need in there from 15 other programs. So just making sure that you're finding ways to condense it. And I think a great thing about having different sheets rather than deleting stuff is like you don't lose all that data that you just took so many weeks, maybe months to even gather. So it wouldn't make sense to delete everything, right? It could just be helpful to add on a sheet to condense that information down in case you ever need that for the future, in case someone you know is applying for graduate school down the road and that information might be helpful. So this is just a different way that you can organize your Excel sheet with all the application materials. All right, so now we're going to jump into letters of recommendation, right? So some general tips, and this is an important part of the application process because I think folks don't really realize the approach that folks should be taking when asking for letters of recommendation. And that's totally fine. I think it's just, these are just things that could help the recommender write you a strong letter and things that we want to make sure that you keep in mind. So the first thing is just giving the recommender enough time. So you want to be asking for those pieces really early on, right? If you have the opportunity to do that in the summer, that's great. The summer before you submit all those pieces in like December or January. I think no later than maybe a month out. I think that's cutting it really close. So making sure that you're asking for those pieces early. Another tip is just provide a deadline and make sure that that deadline is actually a couple weeks before the actual application deadline. So whether you're submitting those letters for them or if your recommender has to submit those letters for you in a different link, making sure that you're giving them an earlier deadline just to give you some buffer time in case your recommender is running late or in case they need a checkup. So make sure that you give them a deadline. So if the deadline is for this Friday, October 29th, and they haven't submitted anything, but the actual deadline is like November 17th, I'm going to make sure that I check in with them this Monday, right? Making sure that they know that their deadline is on Friday, the 29th. It gives them some buffer space. And if they are running late, they still have a couple weeks, but always make sure you follow up. The next tip is just think about who are your recommenders. And I say this because earlier I mentioned that your program is going to be, might be specific or not about who are they asking recommendation letters from. So they might ask for just faculty, and that might be hard if faculty members don't come to mind if you're thinking about someone who can write you a letter of recommendation. So think about who are the folks who can really vouch for you. And again, this doesn't always have to be faculty. And if your program isn't requiring those pieces, that's totally fine. It can be members of the community. It can be an employer that you had, right? So just thinking about who are your recommenders. Make sure to follow up with folks. When I say follow up, I think that for me means follow up after they've already provided you the letter of recommendation and met that deadline. I think recommenders take a lot of time out of the day to do this piece, but then we don't really follow up with them. We don't even follow up with recommenders about like what happened, what did I end up doing with my decision, how did that process go for me, and these are people who you have identified as being part of your network, right? And so I'm sure that they would love to know like where things went, what happened with your decision. So really follow up with them. And I think that should also include a thank you note, whether that's a gift, right? Whether that's a letter, anything really. So always just make sure to follow up about your process. And then the last piece is kind of leading us into the next slides and information regarding letters of recommendation, which includes provide enough context, which I'm going to talk about now. So let's jump into it. So something that I think is very critical when folks are asking for letters of recommendation is I think it's really, really important to provide enough information, which I'll talk about. Oops, let me go back. For folks to be able to write a strong recommendation letter. So I included in here language, which I'm having a hard time seeing because of my panel on here. So let me see if I can close out this panel. Hide floating meeting controls. Okay, perfect. So something that you can write out in an email or when you're talking to someone as an example, what could include something along the lines of, to facilitate you in writing these letters, I have included this portfolio with the following. And just the language of the portfolio means like I've included a couple of pieces, some personal things of mine within that can include the following, right? So it doesn't have to be an actual portfolio, but these are things that could be helpful that end up being basically like a portfolio. So keep that in mind. So that would include a list of programs and program descriptions. So think about why would it be important for a recommender to have a list of program and program descriptions? Why would it be important for me to have that if I'm writing you a letter recommendation? So think about that for a little bit. So the reason this is really important for a recommender is because it's really important for someone to write you a very specific letter of recommendation for a specific program. So if you have maybe Colorado State University occupational therapy, and you have the program description in there, it'll provide me context on like, okay, this is the program focus, and that might be just like a one paragraph. And so whether you're providing me, the recommender, let's use that as an example, whether you're providing me the link to their website, or you're actually putting together a document that has like a Word document that has like Colorado State University occupational therapy. Here's the program description as well in one paragraph. That is going to clearly outline for me the program, because then when I talk about why are you a good fit for this program, I can clearly just pull that information from that description, and that's easy for me to do rather than just talking really generally about why you should be good for this, for just graduate school as a whole. So I think that's really important. So always just make sure you do provide information about the program that you're applying for. The next piece is a personal statement. If you have a draft or a final draft of your personal statement for the graduate program, that would be a great thing to include in your email for a recommender to have to guide them in the writing of a letter of recommendation. If I'm a recommender, I can see and read your personal statement and see why you have a personal connection to the program that I just read about in the program description. I can make those connections. I know you as a student in this capacity, and yes, I have seen you perform these skills. I can see you so and so, right? All those pieces that I might know you as a recommender. And I can make those connections, and I can see you making those connections in that personal statement. So having a personal statement is really good for a recommender to have. Of course, the other piece is just a resume, the most updated resume that you have. If you don't have an updated resume, make sure you get feedback on that first, making sure that you have the things that are applicable to the program. Updated resumes just remind me about the things that you've been doing. We might have talked about them as an advisor before, but this really clearly outlines all those pieces that I might be remembering, but I'm not sure. I don't have those details, but this resume provides me all that information that I know we've talked about, and it's all solidified here. So make sure to have a resume. Another piece is the unofficial transcript. The unofficial transcript is because, yes, it's free. You don't have to send us an official one. That's for your program. But the unofficial one you have access to and you can just print off. Can just give me a screenshot of like where you're at academically. And again, based on what your relationship is with that recommender, they might know those pieces, but again, this is kind of like that resume component, but just for your academics, and they can talk about those pieces. It'll be important for them to talk about your academics, right, for graduate school. And then the last piece could be a writing example. So this can be a project, this can be a paper that you did in a class, right? What are going to be some pieces that are going to highlight your work and how you've shown up in your academics? Kind of speaking a little bit more for like that transcript, right? It's a little bit more of a detailed piece on how you've engaged in like the research that you know you're going to be doing in graduate school. So think about what is a writing sample or something that you've done that is going to help the recommender kind of put those things into perspective for a graduate program. So again, these are just some of the things that would really be helpful for a recommender to have. Yeah. The next piece that I want to talk about, along with providing those portfolio pieces, is really being clear about what you want your recommender to talk about. So in that same email where I outline here are the things that I'm providing you to help you write the letter of recommendation, I'm also going to write in there maybe something along the lines of, in writing these letters, please evaluate me on the following general criteria, right? So here are some of those things. And this is, again, just examples, but I would say think a little bit about your program specifically, because these will be different. So maybe the program really wants to hone in on like academic knowledge and skills, aptitude for graduate study, right? Ability for independent research, classroom performance related to characteristics such as integrity, leadership, problem solving, and teamwork. So again, I think you can identify what are the things that you really want your recommender to talk about based on what your program is looking for. And so just be clear about that. And it's okay to ask for those pieces, honestly. Sometimes I think we feel like it's up to the recommender. And honestly, if your recommender does not think that they can talk about these pieces, they will let you know. And that's okay. I think that's important to also process. The next piece, along with that communication to your recommender, are any just like last things that you want them to talk about that are going to be part of your graduate program experience? And so I would say something along the lines of, also, please include special consideration to the following criteria. So anything with like facility with oral, written, and interpersonal communication, desire to receive a teaching or support assistantship while in the graduate program, passion for helping underserved populations, writing skills. So these are like additional things that you want them to be thinking about as they're writing your letter of recommendation that are going to be a big part of like your experience as a student, that you want them to include. So keep those things in mind as well. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is the graduate admissions exams. We're not going to spend too much time on this. This is the only slide that we have for admissions exams, but just wanted to give a brief overview of some of those, which include GRE, GMAT, the MAT, LSAT, medical college admissions test, which is the MCAT. So this just provides a brief overview of each of those exams, the format of those exams, how long it takes, and the website information. It doesn't include any information regarding like dates, so just make sure to look at that information online. And it does not include any information regarding waivers, so also make sure to look at that information on their website. Something that we wanted to make sure that we talked about as well is the funding. So just some general tips. Of course, there are other presentations from this conference that dive a little bit deeper into funding, so make sure to check those out. But for the sake of this presentation, we're going to just stick to just general tips. Some of the pieces include the first thing, which is track funding opportunities from each institution. So in that Excel sheet where you're tracking all the information of the research that you're doing about each program, make sure to include somewhere in there, like what are the funding that they're offering? Does this program offer housing? Does this program offer an assistantship? Does this program have a specific scholarship that I can apply for? So make sure to keep an eye on that, because the funding piece is going to be a big part to keep in mind, especially when we know that master's degrees, excuse me, are typically not as funded as PhD programs and bachelor programs. The next piece is something to keep in mind in regards to like asking about funding. So always ask for funding before. So make sure that you're asking and being really clear about those pieces with their program coordinator, with their faculty. Maybe you're talking to alumni, maybe to current students. Ask about what is the funding looking like? What are those options for you before you apply? While you are applying, also continue to ask for funding. Maybe you do a school visit after you've been accepted. And at that school visit, you have an opportunity to talk to their coordinators, faculty, continuing to ask about like, I don't have maybe an assistantship. Who else can I work with to maybe secure an opportunity there? So that's during and after. After that could include after you've been accepted to a program, you decided to attend so-and-so program, and now, yes, they provided some funding, but you're still looking for funding. Who can you talk to now as a graduate student on what are other funding opportunities that are going to help you stay there as a student? So always ask for funding. I think some of the things that people forget about is like, okay, I got into this program. This was all the funding that they offered. That's it. And that's not the case. You can always ask for funding even after. Always just make sure to apply for FAFSA. We talked about this earlier. This still applies for graduate school, so make sure that you don't lose that login information. And of course, we also talked about just doing your research on faculty, especially if that assistantship with faculty or that research that you're doing with faculty is typically how they provide funding. Again, this plays a huge role in getting accepted into a program or not, or if you're going to have funding. So make sure that you're looking into the faculty for that program and if they have any spots for you. So now we're going into school visits. Again, this is typically after you've been admitted into a program, maybe during your decision making before the April 15th deadline. Some things to keep in mind. Always ask for travel funds. Again, this is if they're only hosting in person. If they're doing hybrid and in person is an option, but it doesn't have to be your only option. But maybe going in person is actually going to be more beneficial for you because you can talk to someone directly about some of the questions that you have. Then always ask for travel funds. Going back to virtual attendance, always ask if there are other formats for you to engage if you cannot attend physically to the school visit. If you have a ton of school visits to choose from and you're not thinking of going, I would say they're honestly a really great thing to take advantage of. You're going to be meeting other prospective students who have maybe similar questions as you, might be building connections during that time with your peers. You might even be able to talk to faculty. Typically, faculty are available during this time to help answer questions, maybe even offer any open slots of assistantships that they are offering. Other pieces might include like financial workshops during the school visit, just getting to know the program a little bit more. Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was talking about. That third bullet is like, what are they offering at these school visits? Is it worth it for me to attend in person or virtually? What am I missing out if I can't attend at all and it's only in person, but they're not hosting anything in virtually? So keep those things in mind. Ask for funding during your school visit. So while you're at your school visit, keep those things in mind. It's totally okay to continue to ask for funding if maybe you didn't get an assistantship. Using that time to talk to someone in the program about like, hey, I got admitted into the program. The biggest barrier that I might have now is financial pieces. I don't think I can come unless I have an assistantship. Who can I connect with regarding an assistantship opportunities? Is there anything else on campus that I can get involved with? Just an example of how to ask for funding. After school visits, make sure to follow up with any people that you met during during like that networking and connection opportunities. So make sure to follow up with folks, whether that's peers, maybe you're looking for housing because you're going out of state and you're looking for roommates, right? Make sure to follow up with folks, get people's phone numbers, write people's names down, look them up on LinkedIn, see if there's a group chat going. Yeah, always follow up with folks and try to build those connections during that school visit. Ask about funding or excuse me, ask about housing. That just goes along with funding as well as an example. And just remember that you're also interviewing the program at this time. You've already been accepted. You're doing these school visits. Now it's just narrowing down where you want to go. So really be authentic in how you're asking those questions because these are the things that are going to help you make that final decision. So now it's the decision time, the decision making, right? We're getting close to April 15th. So just remember that deadline, keep that in mind, and just make sure to look at the program because they might have their own deadlines that might be before or after. So keep those in mind. Think about what are the expectations, right, that you wanted, that you were holding for your program decision. What are the things that you had to compromise on, and how are you navigating that space now if maybe this program didn't offer you what you wanted? So making sure you keep those things in mind and keep those at the forefront, making sure that you're still trying to advocate for those pieces. That goes along with that third bullet. What are the pieces that are really important to you as you're making that decision? Talk to people, right? I think it's a huge decision. Talk to your network advisors, follow up with the folks who wrote you a letter of recommendation and maybe get their input a little bit on it. They already learned a little bit about the programs that you were interested in, why you were choosing those programs based on how they wrote you those letters of recommendation. They can be a great soundboard for you. I believe that's everything that I have. Yes. So again, this presentation was just to provide folks a little bit of context and how to have a smooth application process. We talked about things to keep in mind regarding a timeline. A great thing to keep in mind as a resource from the Graduate School Conference regarding the timeline is there is a document that we're going to be offering and providing that gives a general timeline for folks. Make sure to take a look at that document. The other piece that we talked about was just tracking all these pieces in an Excel sheet as an example. Again, that's going to be one of the documents that we're offering as a resource that you can use yourself. You can copy it into your own Excel sheet, or you can use it and then create your own Excel sheet. We talked a little bit about how to properly ask for letters of recommendation, some general tips. We'll also be offering a document that you can use as a guide in communicating with folks about those letters of recommendation. And then we talked a little bit about just like some general tips, things to keep in mind. So make sure to browse through the graduate school folder and see what are the resources that we're offering, what are other presentations that you want to engage with. Make sure to fill out that evaluation for the conference. Thank you all for engaging today in this presentation, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.